What is poppin', YouTube? Back again with another video. Today we're doing my must start, must sit running backs for week 2. Goal with this video: if you're 0-1, we're gonna get you to 1-1. If you're 1-0, get you to 2-0. We're helping you win some fantasy football championships on this channel. So hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and let's go. So the first running back we're going to talk about today that's going to be a must start is Dameon Pierce. I've been on the Dameon Pierce train all offseason, and week 1, where Dameon Pierce went up against the Baltimore Ravens and only put up 6.7 fantasy points. Now you might be wondering, why is he going to be a must start for me this week, Caleb? He just put up not great fantasy points. He was literally a low end running back 3. With the Houston Texans, what were you supposed to expect? First game from CJ Stroud against an absolutely stacked offensive line. They were blitzing like crazy. There really was only a little time to throw. And still, the wide receivers for the Houston Texans put up decent fantasy football points, but Dameon Pierce did not. This week, the Houston Texans go play the Colts. Last week, the Colts let the Jags have the 7th most fantasy points to running backs. The Colts, we are excited for this matchup. We think it's going to be an easier matchup for the offensive line than it was for the Baltimore Ravens. So we like the Colts matchup better than we did last week for the Ravens matchup. So I will be starting Dameon Pierce everywhere that I have him. Fire him off again. Dameon Pierce has 3-down bell cow type potential. And so we will be starting Dameon Pierce, especially when you drafted him 5th, 6th round. Dameon Pierce is going to be a super solid start option for you this week. My next starts that you're going to be having are the Detroit Lions running back. I know a lot of people are asking, who do I start? Do I start David Montgomery? Do I start Jahmyr Gibbs? Right now in my rankings, I have them both around RB14, RB15 for this week, and it's still too early to tell. We are going to need to see something happen for both of these guys to hit their absolute ceilings. I think Jahmyr Gibbs will overtake David Montgomery by the middle of the season in regards to getting a lot more touches, because if Jahmyr Gibbs doesn't slip, scores on that touchdown last week against the Kansas City Chiefs, I think we're talking about this week a little bit different than just having David Montgomery, who had that 15-yard touchdown run, but was still averaging below 4 yards per carry. So they're going up against the Seattle Seahawks, which gave up the 8th most fantasy points to running backs last week. We are excited about this matchup. 2 very solid offenses coming to play, 2 rushing attacks that are both very solid. I think the game script will definitely allow both these guys to succeed. I mean, I think David Montgomery is probably touchdown or bust this year, but I think he probably does get a touchdown. And Jahmyr Gibbs, we need to see him get more than, of course, the 7 touches that he had in week 1. Could he get around 10 touches? I know after the game, Dan Campbell said he was easing in Jahmyr Gibbs, but I am excited for both these guys this week, and I will be starting both of them. My third must-start running back is James Cook, who's going up against the Las Vegas Raiders. The Raiders gave the 10th most fantasy points last week to running backs. If we look at the running back usage currently for James Cook in this offense, we're comparing Dameon Pierce, James Cook, Latavius Murray. In this game versus the New York Jets, we're just going to see James Cook absolutely dominating on all plays, also really on early down work and third downs. And so when you're kind of becoming a bell cow like James Cook is starting to become, that is exciting. I know a lot of us were worried about Damian Harris, even Latavius Murray. There were discussions about this being a lot more of a committee than it was in week 1. We can't always assume that they're not just going to go with the hot hand, because the Buffalo Bills have liked to run a committee in the past. But when you drafted James Cook in the 2nd round 2 years ago, this is the type of production, this is the type of usage we were hoping to see. So I am starting James Cook everywhere. Now, if you have 2 solid, you drafted a 1st round running back and a 2nd round running back in your fantasy football drafts, of course you might not be starting James Cook. But I absolutely love James Cook this week as a high-end RB2, and I think this is a great matchup for him. So definitely be starting him everywhere you have him. And I know we're just going to keep on the train of start running backs. Rachaad White let some people down last week. Baker didn't look absolutely great the whole game. I mean, Mike Evans caught a touchdown. Chris Godwin had an okay day, but Rachaad White only had 6.9 fantasy points. I think this is a week for redemption. We saw Rachaad White still be getting on the field a whole lot, and they're going up against the Bears this week. And the Bears, ladies and gentlemen, defense is absolutely terrible. 3rd most fantasy points to running backs last week up against the Packers with Aaron Jones, with AJ Dillon. Now, I'm not saying Rachaad White is going to explode like Aaron Jones did this last week, but when you got a matchup that is favorable to you and you got a defense that is going to put you in favorable situations on offense to let you run the ball, I think Rachaad White, you got to put him in there, especially as a high-end RB2. I like him this week. I know we were pushing him last week because of the volume. Clearly, that didn't play out, but I think this week you also re-rolled the dice with Rachaad White. Then we move on to Ramondre Stevenson versus the Miami Dolphins. Shout out to my man Notorious, who's all over the Miami Dolphins, but this week we will be starting Ramondre Stevenson, because last week against the Chargers, the Miami Dolphins gave up the 2nd most fantasy points to running backs. And so we will be starting Ramondre Stevenson this week. We could make the argument for Zeke as like a low-end flex play, but I do like some Ramondre Stevenson. The Patriots offense looked way better than expected last week. Coming back against the Eagles last week, Ramondre Ramondre Stevenson is another must start. And let me give you one last final sleeper start running back is going to be Jamal Williams. Kendrick Miller didn't get a whole lot of touches, but the New Orleans Saints are going up against the Carolina Panthers this week, who gave up the most fantasy points to running backs. Now, they were going up against the Atlanta Falcons, amazing Atlanta Falcons, who had Tyler Algier, Bijan Robinson, and the amazing offensive line. That's enough to give me some encouragement for my man Jamal Williams that he will be able to provide some solid fantasy football production for you this week. Now, let's get to the negative. We're going to talk about some guys that you should be sitting. Number one, Brian Robinson. I know some people have already asked me some start-sit questions about Brian Robinson. When we're talking like Brian Robinson versus a very low-end wide receiver, of course, I'll probably take the upside shot that Brian Robinson falls into the end zone. This week, the Commanders are playing the Denver Broncos, and the Denver Broncos only gave up the third fewest fantasy points to running backs. And especially with us not being very excited for this committee, I mean, Antonio Gibson's essentially dead after his fumble last week, so it will be the Brian Robinson show, but Brian Robinson just hasn't been able to show any type of explosion. He's just a 3.8, 3.5 yards per carry type running back, and that's not exciting, especially when they're not going to be getting the volume and they're not going to be in the scoring opportunities to be up in the game to then really rely on that running game. So Brian Robinson to me is just an easy must sit this week. We move on to our second sit-em is going to be Raheem Mostert. I know the Dolphins looked good last week. I know Tyreek Hill exploded. I know Jalen Waddle looked good. I mean, Tua looked very good. So we're excited about Raheem Mostert, and having a running back that has a pulse, that's a starter on your team. You always are debating, should I start this guy? But Raheem Mostert, fifth fewest fantasy points to running backs last week. While you could be saying, well, the Dolphins are going to get up big against the Patriots and they're going to have to run the ball, I think this Patriots defense is going to figure out a way to make it tighter than maybe the Chargers did last week. I'm not saying that the Patriots offense is going to be able to keep up, but I think especially in the running attack, we can see Raheem Mostert not be able to get to that 13 fantasy points that he did last week. We might be more seeing Raheem Mostert around 8 or 9. And for me, it's just, there's some other options that I like the upside a lot more. And just, I don't bet against Bill. Don't get bet against Bill. My next must-sit running back is going to be Alexander Mattison. You heard me right. I mean, you might have to start Alexander Mattison if you really want to. The Minnesota Vikings are going up against the Philadelphia Eagles, and I think we didn't like all the splits that much for the Minnesota Vikings in week 1. The Philadelphia Eagles gave up the 11th fewest fantasy points to running backs last week. Last week, they went up against a very solid running core with Zeke and Ramondre Stevenson. So coming into this week, looking at Alexander Mattison, I mean, of course, the Vikings are going to throw the ball a whole lot. I don't like the Minnesota Vikings offensive line versus this Philadelphia Eagles Georgia Bulldogs front line. It's not something that excites me, so I will be sitting Alexander Mattison as well. A few more sits that we could potentially talk about, just rattling off the top. Kyren Williams, I mean, you probably picked him up, but I'm a little bit worried about Kyren Williams this week against the 49ers and against that amazing front seven. AJ Dillon, I mean, if Aaron Jones is out, I know Aaron Jones did tweak that hamstring, but if he is out, could start AJ Dillon. But if Aaron Jones is going to be in, I think AJ Dillon, I just don't like his value at all. Don't like his upside. And then Isaiah Pacheco versus Jaguars, we're also not starting Isaiah Pacheco. So those are some late round sit running backs that you could potentially be sitting this week. We also talked about the starters. So we're going to be putting out a video tomorrow talking about my wide receiver tier rankings. On Saturday, we're talking about my running back tier rankings. So we're going to be getting you all that information ahead of kickoff on Sunday. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. Appreciate that you're here, and I'll catch you on the next one. Peace.